So thank you for joining us today on this MindShift Zoom event, Managing Discipline During Distance Learning with Michael Essien, principal of MLK Middle School in San Francisco, who's really refined the push and solution for managing student behavior. This is our second virtual event, and I want to say thank you for taking your time on a Saturday to join us. I'm Ki Sung, senior editor of MindShift at KQED. Now, the session is really for you, the audience, the folks on the Zoom, so we really encourage questions. Michael is here as a resource for the next hour. I just ask that you please provide as many details as you can in your questions without violating privacy issues, so we have as much context as possible for your situation. It's especially helpful to provide the age range of your student or school. So elementary, middle, and high school. So just to get a sense of who's in the Zoom, let's start with our first poll about what the age range of the kids you have in school. So elementary, middle, or high school. We're going to launch a poll so you can pick. And if you have kids in multiple age groups, try to pick the one age group that brought you to this Zoom. For example, you may have kids in elementary school, but you may really be here for your middle schooler. All right, and as you fill out that poll, I want to take a moment to thank some MindShift supporters. MindShift is a part of KQED, an NPR PBS member station that serves the San Francisco Bay Area. And some of our support comes from individual members. And this session today was especially made possible by the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation. We're thankful for everyone's support. Okay, so thanks for filling out the poll. Let's see the results. All right, so looks like we have a pretty even split between elementary, middle, and high school. Thanks for doing that. All right, so this information is very helpful for our guest speaker, Michael Essien. Michael, for folks who don't already know you, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Most definite. My name is Michael Essien. I am a site leader here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a 29-year public education veteran. I taught in the classrooms for 21 years in Oakland Unified School District. And for the last 8 years, I've been an administrator in San Francisco Unified. My background, I was a math teacher. I taught Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and Trigonometry. And I also taught special education. I was a resource specialist and a special day class teacher. And I am certified by the state of California as an education specialist. And the last thing I'll say is for over a decade, I taught in the UC Berkeley Mathematics, Engineering, Science Achievement Program. So that's who I am as an educator here in California.
Great. And Michael, you're going to start off by telling us a bit about, you have some slides to share with us about managing discipline.
Absolutely. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So welcome to Managing Discipline During Distance Learning. I do want to be upfront. I don't know, in this conversation, I want to be clear, you might be here for different reasons. But I do want to be clear about what we're getting ready to lean into. We're getting ready to lean into conversations around adult mindsets, because managing distance learning, it's not just a specific strategy in which you show up, I tell you X, Y, Z, then you go back and you implement it and life is good. So we're going to lean into this conversation around managing discipline. So who am I? This is going to be important to think about, not because of who I am, but thinking about who you are and being able to reflect on what you bring in terms of your beliefs, values, and past experiences. So what you're looking at here is a collage of who I am. This is my mother, Tenny Abington, and this is my father, Nefri Essien. My history, my folks come from on my mom's side. My folks come from Arkansas. They were sharecroppers, and my grandmother had a 7th grade education. My father came from Nigeria, and he is highly educated. So when you start looking at me, I have a confluence of things that are going on. I have this background where my mother comes from Arkansas, where education was limited, but then my father comes from Nigeria, where education is primary. So when you start thinking about these things, this is part of who I am as I walk into the building. I am a former high school football player, played at Narbonne High School. This is my grandmother at my graduation. She was so proud to have her first and oldest grandchild to graduate. This is my wife. She was my girlfriend then. I met her at Cal, and this is me as a Cal football player. Now, the reason I'm going into these particular things is who I am and my background and past is very important in terms of how I show up and what I contribute or add to the culture of a school site. As we travel around here, we're at my brother. There's three of us. We're at my brother Anthony's graduation from Fresno State. My brother in the middle, Anefri, he is an executive for Cliff Bar. We're at his graduation at Michigan when he graduated from the MBA program. This is me getting my degree from UC Berkeley. These are my two children. This is my son, Dakari, and my daughter, McKenna. And you fast forward, this is my son who graduated 2 summers ago from Cal State Channel Islands. And this is my daughter, McKenna, who just graduated from Wake Forest last summer. So when you start thinking about who I am walking into the building as an educator, these things are a part of my past and shape my beliefs and values. But then there's some other things that are missing from here. If you see down here, there are some symbols. I'm a former National Equity Project Fellow. I used to teach in Oakland Public Schools, used to teach in San Francisco Public Schools, and I'm a two-time graduate of Cal. I did it as an undergrad, and I went there for graduate school as a leader. These are the very experiences, beliefs, and values that I am bringing into the building when I take over because context matters. One's personal experiences shape our opinions and actions, the things that you decide to hold true to, the things you decide to do, and the things you decide not to do. It's based upon this context in which you bring into the building. Why we're here talking about discipline? Because discipline is a problem in public education, but just discipline is a problem for our society in general. But I'm going to lean into this discipline in public education. We see a variety of things that are happening here in this slide. We have a student that was sent home over her extensions. Now, there wasn't anything inappropriate about her hair. It's just that the school had some regulation, some rule, and they felt a need to apply discipline. So she was sent home. A young man shows up to a wrestling event, and I guess the judge for the match felt compelled to force the kid to cut his dreadlocks. He needed to follow some rule, regulation, discipline had to be followed. So before that kid can get into a match, his hair had to be cut. We have here in Philly a 6-year-old autistic girl made a gesture with her fingers with a gun, and the school called the police on a 6-year-old autistic girl. We know about trauma in Compton Unified School District. Some parents sued the school district around not supporting kids who were showing up to the school site who have been traumatized from the various things they've been exposed to in the community. And what did Compton Unified do when those kids showed up to school? They made sure they enforced discipline, right? It's not about the students, it's about enforcing discipline. Then we get these things like these phrases like school to prison pipeline. The NEA covered this. They even articles on this, where there are things that we do inside of school that prepare our children to be participants or become involved with being incarcerated. That is at the heart of discipline. How we choose to look at the behavior of children determines how we respond, what we say, and what we do to them. So when I say our context matters, our background does matter in terms of what we're doing to our children. And then that leads to outcomes, that leads all kinds of crazy things in our society. We know this has just occurred distance learning. Teachers solved this particular toy gun in the background, and the school felt compelled to suspend this kid. Now, this was distance learning at home, and you're looking at the kid and the toy guns that he has at his home. Now, we can hold a question around the value of toy guns, etc., which I do think that that's something that's worthy of discussing. But clearly, when you send the police to the kid's house and they find it's a toy gun, still moving through with the discipline of suspending the kid, these are things where it's like, oh, okay, well, what the heck is going on with adults? Because if we're going to try to manage discipline, managing discipline has to do with having a coherent plan to address the issues and concerns so that we can educate kids. So here is the problem when it comes to managing discipline. I use this symbol here, the fish in the water, the fish being the school system. A fish doesn't know that it's in water. A fish, it just exists. It's always been there. It's always been around the fish. The fish is not aware of water unless you actually pull the fish out of water, then it has some difficulty breathing. But while the fish is swimming around in the water, the place where it lives, it never questions the water, not at all. And I find that discipline in schools are like this. We swim in this water of beliefs, values, stereotypes, stay the course, white supremacy culture, notions of intelligence, deficit thinking. We have the savior complex, accountability, control. But the thing that's really driving most decisions in schools, it's test scores. Like we need to improve test scores. And anything that's going to impact test scores needs to be met with discipline. So this is what is occurring. I like to call the water, it's the waters of implicit bias. These implicit bias are the beliefs and values of adults that are never questioned, that are never thought about, but that shape the school system that generates the results. It shapes the school system that allows an adult to see a 6-year-old autistic girl in a classroom make a gesture with her fingers as a gun and to call the police, and that is acceptable. The implicit bias allows us to see a young man show up to a wrestling match and the official saying that I need to cut your hair literally before you can participate in this event. And there are no questions or pushback from other individuals. It's just accepted. This implicit bias causes harm to the students and families that we serve. So, how do we manage discipline? In order to manage discipline, we cannot solve the problem with the same consciousness that created it. You must learn to see the world anew. If you look at schools across this nation, you can just take a dart and throw it and hit the map. If the map has a school in it and that school has some black children, brown children in it, there's going to be a discipline problem. And people try to find out, well, what is the problem with children? How can we solve the problem with children? Well, the problem is not with children. Children are children. The problem is with adults in the system that we create. Well, here's a definition. When I start talking about systems, systems, it's not some boogeyman. It's not somebody outside the school that is literally doing something to students. It's literally us. So a system is simply defined as a system is the collective thoughts of adults in the building as they use their own personal beliefs and values to interpret rules, policies, and procedures applied to student behavior. How adults think about the child's behavior determines how we manage behavior because managing behavior is around authority and power, and adults have it and children don't. Why am I showing you this slide? When we start talking about managing behavior, as a principal, I'm responsible for a system. I'm responsible for all teachers in the building. I'm responsible for data outcomes. But data outcomes are connected to, going back to this particular definition, it's the collective thoughts of adults in the building as they use their own personal beliefs and values to interpret rules, policies, procedures, and apply to student behavior. So, what are you looking at here? You're looking at a chart that shows office discipline referrals written by teachers at my school site. Each bar represents an individual teacher. Now, how do we look at this? We probably say, oh, well, one teacher's doing this and one teacher's doing too much, and maybe some other teachers aren't doing enough. But as a person who's thinking in terms of systems and implicit bias, what we see here is that there aren't any consistent rules for implementing or determining what a referral is. That means a student is getting an experience in the classroom connected to discipline based upon the randomness of the teacher in which he or she is assigned to. And it is this randomness that produces the problems. It is this randomness that produces the inequities. It is this randomness that creates a bad experience for students. So, what do? We have to manage these particular things as site administrators. Well, we got to go into the details, right? The data that we saw previously, this is the data that shows who was receiving the referrals, right? When you look at this, it's like, oh, well, when we got a problem here, there seems to be a focus on Black students receiving referrals, and most people tend to immediately bristle up, and you should, because this is problematic, right? Anybody should be concerned when looking at this, but you have to go into the details in terms of, well, why are Black students disproportionately receiving referrals at a school site? The answer to that lies in dealing with adult building adult capacity. We discovered that many of the students who were coming into our school site, they had some experiences that we would call trauma, or that fall under the ACEs, the adverse uh, childhood experiences. And many of my teachers didn't have the ability to deal with kids seated in their classrooms. And so we know the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Black kids were being referred out at a greater number than other kids. And that is an equity issue, and that has to be solved. That has to be stopped, right? So what do we got to do? We got to build a capacity of adults, consistency across systems. In order for that to occur, it is what we call mirror window work. As an individual who was a National Equity Project fellow, uh, this is very important work that they do in terms of mirror window work. It is something that we also do at our school site. How do you reflect on who you are as a person, looking inward, insights into myself? Did I come from a background? So I'm on the campus at my school site. Although I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, during the time of gangs and the crack epidemic, inside my household, my household was Southern Baptist. And so there were some different things going on. That is showing up with me as I walk through the building, all the beliefs and values that my mom instilled. And I show up at the school site and I interact with kids in a way that reinforces what I've been exposed to as a child coming up. And then the question becomes, is that beneficial for the students that I'm dealing with? Can I assess myself as a site leader to make sure that the decisions that I'm making are benefiting kids? Because the decisions I do make are going to determine how discipline looks and how it's played out at school. If I can reflect on me inwardly, then it can shape how I understand and view the students, my colleagues, as I look out and interact with individuals. So we got to do some mindset work. So of course we set up things where we have some bodies where teachers go through professional development, where not only we talking about how do we make students independent learners, but we're actually dealing with systemic racism. And we're not talking about systemic racism where we're talking about what is happening in Alabama and Mississippi. We're talking about what's happening inside of our school. We can specifically talk about, well, why are Black kids being referred out more than other children? And we lean into that. What does it say about us as a staff? What does it say about the inconsistency of referral writing? And then what are our steps to address those things? Well, one of the things that we needed to do was we needed to engage in exploration anchored around stuff. And so we decided to form a book club. And it's through this book club that we anchored our conversation and reflections around what we do. And you can see I put it by year: courageous conversation about race for white folks who teach in the hood and the rest of y'all too, multiplication for white people, etc. This current year, we're reading the book by Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. We don't just look at these books just for the sake of reading. When we were reading Courageous Conversations about Race, as we read the book, we then began to look around our school site and then look inward, the mirror work, the window work, around what are some things that we're doing at the school site that this book might be calling out. that this book might say we need to maybe explore a little deeper why we do particular things. For white folks who teach in the hood and the rest of y'all too, when we read that book, that ended up producing what we call coaching groups, where we now have coaching groups. Coaching groups are where you get a cross section of students to give adults feedback on their curriculum, teaching practices inside the classroom, and feedback on school policies and procedures. So we began to use books to do a reflection around who we are as adults and the work that we're doing inside of the schools. So then we had to do some community building. We need to include student voices and decisions at the school site. So it wasn't about us doing things to kids, it's about doing things with kids. So what you have here is we have an onboarding process. When we start the school year, we don't immediately lean into books. There is a building of experiences and expectations over a 4 week period. You're looking at one of the older calendars, but one of the things that we do here at the school site is we are a PAX Good Behavior Game school, and we do see, hear, do field charts. We engage students around conversations of what they want to see, hear, do, feel more of, and what they want to see, hear, do, feel less of. And then from that, that becomes the rules and regulations that are governing the community inside of the classroom. So we don't look at discipline as the rules themselves. We look at discipline as building community with the students we are entrusted with educating. This is an example of the see, hear, do, feel chart. And so now that we move to distance learning, the mindset of our teachers had been shifted already in terms of being more inclusive. So it's not about discipline in terms of punishing kids, it's discipline in terms of when discipline needs to occur, this is an opportunity to help a kid learn coping strategies and responses, different responses to situations they might be facing. So what are some of the additional things that we do to support the students and teachers inside of distance learning? Well, we have additional adults inside of the Zoom classroom. So when a student is misbehaving, you just don't kick the kid out of the classroom. What you do is you have an adult that goes into a breakout room that can actually do a restorative conversation with the child and then reintegrate the child back into the classroom setting. We have daily homerooms, which are check-ins, circles, where we get to check in with kids and see what's going on with them. Our student support team, with kids referred out, and then they process kids when their issues are concerned, where issues are concerned, that we have a virtual student support department team, and they go inside the classroom as well. And the push-in services, which have been uh, yielded some amazing results for us. We've actually created the push-in services virtually. My assistant principal, Tyson Fector, he's an amazing and a brilliant person. He ended up creating push-in virtually, where he reproduced what we did in person so that teachers can still continue to teach and keep kids inside the classroom as learners. Office hours, we use healing center practices. And the thing that's really important around student voice is student surveys. We literally give student surveys for them to give us feedback on distance learning and their experience inside the classroom and with student support department so that we can make changes that benefit them. This is what we do. So when it comes to managing discipline, what we're really talking about is how do we help adults be consistent in how they think and respond to behaviors that we see from children that we might deem inappropriate. There has to be a way to respond to that behavior that is beneficial to the child and to the teacher, because we need that child to remain as a learner and not get involved in this constant wheel of being sent out of class and being told that they're bad. Uh, Many children, like I used to be a child, and we do a variety of things. How do we support them and dealing with their struggles as a child that may come out in ways that that may seem inappropriate to us, but they're really looking for support and managing and moving through life. This process has helped us make some amazing outcomes, get some amazing outcomes from the suspension data. When we've done these things, like this is what occurred when I became the principal at this point. Our suspension data went down. The same thing occurred with our referral data. Our referral data went down. So what this indicates, it's not about the referral data and the suspension data going down. What I'm interpreting this is the mindsets of the adults shifted in such a way that is benefiting kids. And if you come to our school site and if you see it virtually, classrooms aren't out of control. Like kids are learning. And so being able to respond to students in a way that's validating, in a way that is consistent, yields results for students and it yields results for teachers. Thank you. Michael Essien. You can email me at Essien Education Group at Gmail, and you can follow me at Twitter, Michael Essien, Michael C. Essien. With
Uh,
that, I'm going to, I guess, open up for questions.
yeah, so if folks have questions, please drop them into the question box so we can keep a better eye on it. And I will be your asker to Michael. Just be sure to provide as many details as possible so we have context, but be mindful of privacy issues. And I do. All right, hang on. I had another poll question, but I want you all to work on your questions as well. Um, I do want to add that Michael was featured in a MindShift podcast episode a few years ago about this, and one part of the story that really jumped out at me was when you talked about repairing the relationship, right? That when a student gets is being disruptive, or if the student gets pulled out of class, like the relationship is harmed, and the adult needs to do work to repair the relationship. And that really helped me understand like how much you really empathize with students, and thinking about their worldview and what they're going through. um, and I'm wondering, like, how did you get to that point of really identifying with the student and understanding that relationship, and the point at which it needs to be repaired?
Good question. So for me, it goes back to my time in LA Unified School District. I did my K-12 experience in LA Unified, and I was a kid that had some problems. When I say I had some problems, uh, I had anger issues. I did a lot of fighting, etc. But one of the things that, well, something that never occurred or never happened to me, teachers never felt that I was a bad kid. Teachers felt that I just needed some additional support. Teachers never withheld things from me. Teachers went out of their way to do some extra things to support me. And it wasn't until I was getting ready to leave high school that I felt that this community schooling, it wasn't like the community schooling model, but this community schooling, that we were in a small community and people knew my mother, people knew my uncles. And so they never interpreted my behavior as something that was connected to one day you're going to go to prison, et cetera. They provided all these resources. So when I became a teacher, I was noticing in Oakland Unified, when things would occur, when children would do some things like, oh, I remember I used to do that too, right? But then I saw that we were doing things like putting up kids for expulsion. Kid would be suspended for 5 days. And I was like, oh, I remember when that happened and I did it. That didn't occur. That didn't happen to me. I was like, so why are we criminalizing children now? So then it became a goal for me, if I ever became a principal, that I was going to work to change that, that we needed to view kids as trying to experience life, or kids experiencing life, and we needed to make sure that we help them understand what occurred to them, why they did what they did, and what are some viable options. And so when I became a principal, I did that. But I also, when I was a teacher, I did that inside of my classroom. I couldn't control what we did school-wide, but I could control what happened inside my classroom. And kids really responded to that inside my classroom, and they're responding to it now as an administrator who's trying to shape something system-wide to replicate what I had in my class.
Right. So I have a question from, I think it's a comment from Rachel. In your district, is there a matrix of discipline that is being used and has had some positive effects? I'm working with union leaders and admin to create a district discipline matrix, but coming up with roadblocks since everyone has a different philosophy with suspension, restorative justice, behavior, etc. I'm not sure how we can make this possible and make sure it's used to fidelity.
So district matrices are good, um, but whenever you produce a set criteria where, like, if these things occur, this has to happen. Anything that's compulsory, it will replicate the system that you already have, because it's literally the adults. It is how adults think about things. So if adults are constantly referring kids out or suspending kids out, if you create a matrix, adults will use that matrix to still do the same thing. So our district, we do have a matrix for determining behavior, but at our school site, we say every incident is a case by case, or we treat every incident as a case by case basis. When you have a matrix, things go to different levels. And when kids who need the most support, kids who are exposed to trauma, what ends up happening is the matrix only reinforces the things that we saw traditionally. So I am for matrices in all districts, but more importantly, I'm for the development of the mindset of adults who have to apply the matrix. That's what's important.
Uh, and Orphalina, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Uh, Her question is, I'm a woman of color, ESL emerging, sorry, immigrant, short, and wanting to break the stereotype that a female can't be a dean, and that discipline our students needs a different approach. I'm looking to transition from a school counselor to a dean role. Do you have any advice?
Yes, I do have some advice. I think wherever you go, if you want to transition to a dean role, you you need to align with an administrator who has similar views. If you decide you want to move to the dean role and you want to implement a process that's more restorative, and you have a principal who does not believe in restorative practices, you're going to be really frustrated. So my suggestion to you is whatever district you're in, if you want to remain in that district, start asking questions and feeling around like who are the administrators that have this restorative lens or a lens that's more healing centered. And then you want to make connections there because as you transition to dean, that's the spot that you want to be. Or maybe there might be multiple spots or multiple places, but that would be my suggestion. If not, then you need to potentially find a school that will let you run a center so that you can shape how people think about behavior and discipline at your school site.
And this is a question I had from your talk, which is a lot of times when you're implementing a strategy at school, there's inevitably pushback from teachers and others, perhaps. But I'm wondering how you at MLK how you at MLK worked with teachers to do the work and really look into themselves, and how you manage those who maybe didn't want to participate.
So, well, we didn't have anybody that did not want to participate. So the conditions at MLK were that bad in terms of there were some things I do presentations. There's a slide that I have in one of my presentations I do often, and it's 14, 11, and 9. We're a school site that has 23 content teachers. The year I was hired as an AP, we hired 14 new teachers out of 23. At the end of my first year, we hired 11 new teachers out of 23. Then we had hired 9 new teachers out of 23. When you think about that constant turnover and think about what the working conditions were like for adults in the building, buying into trying to reduce that was very easy. Like I have teachers that they're not really pushing back on this. Like teachers are looking for support. Teachers want to be successful. Teachers want to teach. They don't want to spend their time engaging in discipline, right? And so it was not difficult to get teachers to buy into like we've identified that this is what the issue is. These are some structures that we put in place. Let's give it a shot. And we gave it a shot and it worked. Teachers really respond to data that indicates their issues and concerns, and then you need to address the teacher issues and concerns. More time than not, that's not how it operates. We look at the data. If I show the data of the Black students, and then it comes down to, well, Essien, what are you making your teachers do? It's like, no, we went inside the data. Like, what is the data saying we need as teachers when we look at the number of Black students that are being sent out? Shifting the conversation, reframing it in terms of supporting teachers allows you to get teachers to buy in. And then if a teacher doesn't buy in, you can hold that one-off conversation as opposed to just defaulting to or assuming that teachers don't want to make changes.
All right, so this is a question from Patrice. Do you see general ed teachers who are implementing the approach but are still dealing with student discipline issues? How do you deal with this for teachers and the students?
Yeah, we kids are kids. And so It's not all of a sudden because we magically did this, all of a sudden kids stop being kids and everybody, they follow everything that we say. Yes, we still have issues. But what teachers have been trained to do, and it comes from my special ed background, teachers have been trained in de-escalation. And so they're trained to notice when something is escalating, and then their job is to not escalate the situation and call for support. This is what push-in services is, right? It's the teachers identifying that this could escalate to something. I need somebody to come in and support this student to re-engage as a learner so that I can continue teaching. And so this is what we do. We still have problems. Kids, sixth, seventh, eighth grade, kids are kids. Uh, it's just how we respond, and then kids will adjust to how you respond because now they understand that there's going to be support and they feel safe and supported. That doesn't mean that does not mean that they will not act out.
Right. So I have a question here that's a bit of a blast from the past. Sarah asked, I contacted you 2 years ago about the push-in program, and your ideas helped us start our own push-in program. It's been successful for most students. However, there are 1 to 2 students who are dealing with severe trauma and mental health issues. Have you had students who don't respond to the push-in program? How can we better support these students?
Okay. So this is where I'm going to say thank you for the question, and I'll probably go look through the emails. I know because I respond to people when people send me emails, and I'm glad to hear that there's some success. Whenever we're talking about a systems change is for all students, but we don't expect all students to respond the same way. What we do expect is the system to reduce the number of false positives, kids who end up in discipline cycles because the environment is chaotic. So what we need to do, the push-in model creates a neutral playing field and where we now find out the kids who need the tier two and the tier three supports. At my school site, prior to the push-in model, we identified 272 kids out of 500 kids needing tier two and tier three supports. That is not manageable. You cannot manage that. But when we put in the push-in model, we found out that we did not have 272 kids. We ended up having about 32 kids. Those 32 kids, because they now stood out, we can get them the appropriate resources because now we're a community school. We can get the supports for those children. We get the supports for their families so that we can begin to meet their needs. That is something different than saying, oh, well, why didn't those 32 kids respond to the push-in models? Like, no, those 32 kids were identified as they needed additional supports and services. And then it's the school's job to respond to that.
Right. I have a question from Mrs. Hurlbert. Hello, Michael. Can you talk a little bit more about your push-in support model and the challenges of connecting with students when we are remote? So perhaps more details about push-in.
Okay. So push-in model is this. We teach teachers how to identify when kids are escalating. And then we're trying to prevent the child from escalating, what we call in our district the rider off the horse, where we have an episode where the kid loses it and it doesn't make a difference what you say to the kid is going to be non-responsive. So a teacher needs to be able to identify when we're potentially headed in that direction. And when a teacher finds out that we're potentially headed to the kid escalating to a point where they're going to lose it or have an episode, it is the teacher's job, the phrasing we use, to drop the rope. We do not engage in a tug of war with students. You drop the rope, you call for push in, and an adult comes into the building, comes into your classroom to literally get the student re-engaged as a learner. We can't get students re-engaged as a learner if that kid has an episode, that kid actually blows up. How do we replicate this in distance learning? Teachers are in Zoom classrooms. Kids do a variety of things. So we use our student support department and other non-classroom teachers as resources for in-class instruction. We place them inside the room so that we have additional adults. We have paras inside the rooms, the librarians inside the rooms, counselors, social workers. They're all inside these rooms at strategic places. So if something was to occur, immediate breakout room could happen in that setting where we can say, hey, this kid is acting up, take him into a breakout room, hold a conversation, and then when everything's fine, bring the kid back. What we ended up doing for the push-in model, as adults are in these meeting spaces, we use Zoom, but in order for us to access the people who are responsible for doing the push-in, we use a Google chat which has everybody's name who's responsible for doing push-in. So if a particular teacher needs a push-in and they don't have an adult in the room to support them, they can just send, "Hey, I need push-in. This is Essien." And so whoever's responding, and you could be in another classroom, you will leave that classroom, jump into another Zoom room, and go into a breakout room to process a particular situation so the kid can come back as a learner. This is what we're doing for push-in on the distance learning level.
Speaking of Zoom, we have a question about Google. So for schools who are using Google centric and thus use Google Meets, there are no breakout rooms. What other suggestions do you have for unruly students, interruptions on chat or verbal? Is it possible to manage muting because in Meets the student can unmute at will and the class is hybrid, half students at home and half in class?
Yeah. Wow, that is a complex situation. What I would say, if you do not have additional adults inside the Google Meet classrooms, the one thing that has to occur, if a kid needs to be counseled, like it's one thing if a kid is just like maybe playing around with the chat or the mute button, but if you're talking about there's a situation where a kid needs counseling, then that has to be a one-on-one conversation. There has to be a way of notifying some other adult where the kid can be removed from the Google Meet classroom to be placed in another meeting where the adult can process what is going on with the child. We see children acting up not as a bad thing. That kid is communicating that they need something. And so then it is our job not to see it as discipline, but figuring out what is it that that child needs. And I don't know what your system would look like, but you would have to have a system where that child's needs could be met. But I know for a fact that it can't be met in the middle of a Google Meets classroom where you don't have breakout rooms. There has to be another system set up to make that happen.
And Michael, I know that at your school you value student feedback a great deal. You have like Principal Fridays, is that right?
Yeah,
Once a
yeah.
month or something like that. And there's a question here from Thomas, which is, do you teach students to participate in the push-in program?
Yes. So what has happened is when things become institutionalized, um, the students don't participate in the push-in program in maybe the way I think you're asking, in terms of they're not the ones that are sent into the classroom to calm another kid down. We have peer mediations for that. We have peer mediations that are occurring when we're in person, and peer mediations if students want to have mediations run by our peer resource classes, which are students trained in peer mediations. But what students can do, because it's been institutionalized, push-in services and what we call student rights, a student can, and we've had students call for push-ins themselves. Like, I need a push-in because maybe they feel that what was going on with the teacher in that moment is just not happening. And then that is feedback for us, because then we can hold a conversation with the student and the teacher around like what was going on, especially if a kid felt that their needs weren't being met, that maybe something was happening, and then how do we support the kid and the teacher so that that situation can't occur again. But that is now an option. A student can also call for pushing, and we've had that happen a few times.
Okay, I have a question from Claudine, who asked, I teach in a Navajo reservation. Poverty and drug issues are some of the reasons for misbehavior in our school. How do you handle marijuana drug use at your school?
These are all great questions. So here's the deal: schools have to deal with so many issues. uh, the political world, where they defunded mental health services and social services, there are real consequences in our communities for that. Those things intersect at school sites. So then how do we as a school respond to these myriad of needs from students and families because mental health services and social services have been reduced? We are a community school. Community school is something very specific. I have a community school coordinator that assesses the needs of our students and families, and then we partner with agencies to deliver services to those students and families. So at MLK, in addition to pushing services and the restorative practices, we partner with over 50 different agencies that deliver services to our students and families. So when we start talking about if a kid is having problems with marijuana, or we have children who have family members that are incarcerated, If we have kids who are showing up in data that indicates that they're going to be dropouts in high school, we partner with agencies that specifically have those students and families on their caseload to support them. So this is how we would address it. I think the community school model is important because it is the model that diversifies how you can look at and respond to all of the issues. Prior to being a community school, if there was a marijuana issue, that had to be looked through a discipline lens. And what's the consequences? Well, the California Education Code says I can suspend or I can do this. Well, we can actually have a more varied conversation, a more nuanced conversation around things because we're a community school. So we're always thinking about supporting students and families to make better decisions.
All right. So this is a question about a somewhat controversial issue, which is keeping cameras on during Zoom. And I just want to give you some context here because for those watching at home, there was a survey in EdWeek this week, or sorry, the results were released this week that showed that among teachers surveyed, sorry, I'm just going to pull this up and I'll drop the tweet in. 60% of educators say that students who don't have their video cameras on in class face consequences, most commonly having their parents notified, losing participation points, or being marked partially or fully absent. I'll drop that tweet in the chat box in a moment, but Allie wanted to know what your thoughts are. Santamina, sorry, wrong person, wanted to know what your thoughts about insisting that students keep their screens on during Google and Zoom class meetings.
We don't. That is not an issue. That is not an issue. I always ask, and this is what's really important around education. For what purposes do you need the screen on? Right. And when you say, oh, well, we want engagement. Well, can a kid engage without having the screen on? Like, yeah. Well, we want to know if the kid is there. Well, can't you ask questions? Aren't there ways to check for understanding without the screen being on? We know that children have so many social issues, and like the middle school is like the perfect area. And I don't know what potentially why it's happening in high school. I can have my own assumptions. But as kids are growing into their identities and people have self-confidence issues, like forcing a kid to have the screen on and then kids engaging in this back and forth bullying and it becomes an issue to force a kid because now we're traumatizing a kid to have their screen on. And we know that these are the same kids that were in school and they had less friends or or they were loners or they were who were fitting in with other groups just so they wouldn't be picked on. Now we're at distance learning. We can't force kids because I feel that is traumatizing kids. But the thing that's great about my school site and the teachers I work with is my teachers believe that too. So it's not even an issue. We don't even deal with that. What I would say is that people need to examine why they want the screens on. And if the reasons why they want the screen on can be achieved with the screen being off, they should move in that direction as opposed to fighting kids over having their screen on. Because there's some intrusive things going on inside of these classrooms because the rules have changed now with us being mandated reporters and screens being on. We've seen parents walk past accidentally naked, kids being suspended with BB guns. There are all kinds of things that are occurring. And so there could be some valid reasons for screens being off. And it's just really, for us, it's just not really worth fighting. And SFUSD, San Francisco Unified, is not forcing us to make that happen.
All right, so we got just a few minutes left. So I'm going to toss you one question from Elizabeth, which is an interesting parent perspective. Since so many parents are playing tech support and teacher's aid and all the things we do at home to support students doing remote learning. So as parents, what can we do to prevent our kids getting in trouble during a Zoom class? How can we help them to deal with their emotions like frustration?
Wow, that is a great question. Um, because I do know with the distance learning, one of the biggest challenges with distance learning is the responsibilities that have been transferred to the household for instruction. So what I would suggest, parent who is not an educator, is that you engage. I would call the school site and talk to the teacher or teachers connected to your child, and then ask them these questions, like what kinds of supports could you use at the household, thinking about your own context and situation, so that you can support your child with emotional regulation, with maybe frustrations that might be arising from like technical difficulties or people bullying in the chat. That there are some specific strategies, and people should be willing to help teachers. I do believe that the distance learning is providing an additional opportunity for there to be a stronger relationship between the school sites and parents around instruction. I think it has clearly highlighted the fact that we're locked in a relationship for a child's outcome.
All right, and I'm going to ask through you one more question. I'm going to combine two questions because these are college related. This is from John about your thoughts on distance learning for college students. I know you've specialized in K to 12, but I'm wondering if you could give some advice to folks interested in higher ed in this room. And then also Maureen asks, I'm a university professor supporting interns and student teachers in the classroom. Now that the classrooms are virtual, can you address how you're dealing with general behavior challenges, social etiquette, rudeness to one another, attendance accountability, etc.?
Okay.
And I'm also going to drop the link to Michael's upcoming workshop, just so you have it here in the chat.
All right. So the college question first. I'm assuming since I'm K-12, like preparing kids to get to college so that they can be successful. I think if that is the lens that we're talking about, the quality of the instruction for virtual learning, I think this is one of the challenges that K-12 is facing. Not only were we not prepared to do distance learning, we were hurried to throw some things together. And so one of the things that did suffer when we threw together our distance learning was the rigor, being able to engage in some inquiry based, worthy based explorations for students. That is something that is developing and growing as we're trying to get better at that. Because one of the things is teachers, especially teachers who were not familiar with technology, now they have to literally be the experts, and there's a steep learning curve for them. And the struggle is, how do we support teachers in developing their proficiency in that, so that we can have rigorous outcomes for kids who want to go to college, right? My daughter's struggling. My daughter, she graduated and she struggled with the last semester at Wake Forest with the distance learning, because there's something to that personal interaction. And then there was a second question, which was,
Mm,
I'm trying
hang
to
on,
rack
let
my
me.
brain.
Sorry, preparing for the next thing. Let's see here. It kind of disappeared. It was about, oh, right, professors. Thank you, Johan, who's helping us right now. I'm a university professor supporting interns and student teachers in the classroom. Now that the classrooms are virtual, can you address how you're dealing with general behavior
Oh, yes,
challenges,
yes, yes.
social etiquette, rudeness to one another?
So these are things that they're tied into that that 4-week calendar, where you're building capacity, where you're explaining kids what the expectations are. We're also doing things with kids in terms of building community, what is expected, what they feel we should see, hear, do, feel more of and less of. And then how do you incentivize that through PAC's good behavior games? Is something that we also do. And so I think it's, for us, it's really not managing discipline, but then when we have kids that violate these rules, that do inappropriate things, then how do we then check in with them? Like I told you, we have a system where when that occurs, we have adults that can go out in breakout rooms for Zoom and check in, like, hey, Essien, like, we have this agreement, and you were the one that came up with this, blah, blah, blah. Why are you violating it? Is everything okay? So we have a way of responding to it in a way that's not necessarily discipline, but checking in with the child to see what's going on, because maybe they need some support around, maybe they didn't eat last night, right? We don't know why they're behaving, but we see the behavior as a child expressing a need for additional support.
Great. So, Michael, my last question for you is, you're hosting a professional development session in about 4 weeks.
Yes.
Can you tell folks a little bit about that and what they can expect from the event? And I will post the link in the chat right now so everybody sees it.
Okay. So I'm hosting a push-in service workshop. It's a 2-day virtual workshop, and what it explores the systems of schools that produce the outcomes. And if you remember, the systems is literally the collective thoughts and adults based upon their beliefs and values as they apply them to the behaviors of students. Well, we explore systems thinking. We explore how our own implicit biases shape the outcomes, the inequities that we see. It's not the students, it's the collective thoughts of the adults that are producing that. And we explore the collective thoughts. We explore individual thoughts. We explore the mirror versus window um, situation, dichotomy, and then we go into strategies that can be used at your school site. This is not like a normal workshop. This is not a workshop where you get to show up and you're there for 2 days and then you go off. People who participate in this workshop, this will be cohort 2. And then after the workshop, you then get to participate in a once a month professional learning community for the spring semester. We're wrapping up. We have 2 more sessions for the fall semester cohort. So it's an ongoing thing that actually works with the school site and or individuals to build their capacity. Because more times than not, when you go back to your school, it's like, well, wait a minute, I don't know how to do this, or when I have some additional questions and it's too late, the workshop is over. That's not how this works. It's an ongoing professional learning community. And so I encourage people to sign up for teams and or individuals. It doesn't make a difference, and become part of cohort 2 so we can try to get better outcomes for all students. When I say all students, the pushing services weren't created just for the kids that people say are the discipline problems. Everybody loses in instruction when kids disrupt the learning. And so pushing is for everyone. It's for all kids.
Great. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up because we're out of time. So Michael, thank you for sharing your insights with us. And all those who register for this event, I will send you an email with links, with a version of the slides, and all the things you need from this session, and the recorded version of the session as well. I need to plug a couple events that might interest you. We have at KQED, there's a KQED election 2020 youth media screening on October 21st with a keynote by Jason Reynolds. You can sign up and register on the link you see in the Zoom. And I also want to take a moment to thank some of MindShift supporters. MindShift is a part of KQED, an NPR PBS member station that serves the San Francisco Bay Area. And thanks again to the individuals who support MindShift and KQED. And thanks also to the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation. We're thankful for everyone's support. And thank you especially to Michael Essien. We appreciate your work and your insights.
Everybody have a wonderful day.